Biosphere II was designed to be a self-contained ecosystem. It is a glass structure that contains an array of different biomes of various environments, a human habitat zone, an internal weather system, an internal recycling system, air temperature control system, solar panels for energy, 2 lungs, and lots of science. As partially witnessed in the novel, even with these astounding technologies, problems arise. Before discussing the problems that are later faced, we are first going to explain the scientific elements of Biosphere II. Water in the biosphere is conserved in the natural habitats planted in the biosphere. These include several environmental biomes such as the marsh and the rainforest. All of the water conserved is recycled and used in other parts of the ecosphere, such as watering plants, acting as rain, and draining soil. The crew recycled their sewage and effluent, drinking the same water countless times, totally purified by their plants, soil, atmosphere, and machines, which was huge considering that NASA hadn't accomplished total water recycling until 2009, which wasn't until 18 years after the end of the experiments. One of the least acknowledged scientific factors of the biosphere is the human habitat zone that was constructed. In order to construct the human habitat zone, scientists needed to find out first what humans need physically and socially to survive. This meant that the human habitat zone needed to have a comforting aspect. This zone included rooms such as dormitories, bathrooms, a kitchen, and even a library. The biosphere's location in the Arizona desert prompted a unique challenge. The constantly changing desert temperature would constantly cause the fixed 170,000 cubic meters of atmosphere to expand and collapse. The lungs, which were actually an enormous circular chamber with a roof made of galvanized rubber, all enclosed in an opaque dome, were installed in order to combat these changes in air volume. When sunlight warms the inside air, it increases the pressure. The increased air pressure forces the air through an underground passageway into a galvanized rubber dome. As the air pressure increases, the air flooding the dome pushes against the weighted ceiling, raising it upwards. As the temperature cools and the air pressure decreases, the steel-weighted center becomes stronger than the force exerted by the air pressure, coming to rest on the floor on steel legs. One of the main purposes of the biosphere was to examine how the biosphere of the Earth functions. The biosphere housed 7 biomes: the rain, forest, ocean, desert, savanna, marsh, agriculture, and human biomes. The rainforest biome consisted of several different kinds of rainforests, including cloud forests, lowland rainforests, and a floodplain. The biome utilized bamboo in order to screen excess salt in the air from the ocean biome and built a monocoque plant to screen lateral light. The ocean biome was a large pool, 35 by 20 meters across, reaching up to 7 meters deep, meant to simulate a Caribbean reef. The biome contained approximately 2.6 million liters of water, housing roughly 25 species of hard corals, 15 species of fish, 25 species of algae, and over 100 invertebrate species. The desert biome was present to simulate and examine an arid desert with erratic winter rainfall and summer drought. The savanna biome provided a transition between the desert and rainforest biomes in terms of water cycles. The savanna was designed to simulate tropical savannas with 4 major parts: the quartzite slope, the upper savanna, the granite slope, and the lower savanna. The upper savanna was periodically flooded to create a hyperseasonal effect. The marsh biome was designed to simulate an estuary ecosystem. The marsh biome contained 2 major types of marshland: marshes dominated by grasses and forested marshes. Starting with the freshwater pond, the marshlands gradually shifted from a freshwater to a mangrove marine ecosystem, with an oligohaline marsh acting as the transition. The marshland also consisted of salt marsh section, a black mangrove section, and an oyster bay section, and a fringing red mangrove section. Each distinct marshland simulated was separated by walls that still permitted water flow and species transfer. The agricultural biome served as the primary food source for the biosphere. The biome contained housing for the livestock consisting of pigs, goats, and hens and roosters. Along the farmland for growing the essential potatoes, peanuts, beans, wheat, and other vegetables, there was present a tropical orchard. The rice paddy provided the biosphere with rice while simultaneously allowing for the growth of azolla plants as animal and eventually people feed, and provided a habitat for tilapia fish as an additional food source. The human habitat contained the crew's living quarters. The area also contained a kitchen, a clinic, a lab, a communication center, as well as some recreational facilities such as a library and an exercise room. The biosphere was designed in a way that made it self-sufficient for long periods of time. Water was primarily gathered from condensation, both from water emitted from plants and from evaporation in the ocean biome, and water that drained into the soil. Water gathered from soil drainage was treated with reverse osmosis. Water used by the crew of the biosphere was recycled. The water cycle of the biosphere is designed to be a completely closed system. The water reservoir, which feeds the entire biosphere, takes in water from a variety of internal sources. The secondary source is through soil drainage. Water that re-enters the system through manual rainfall across the biomes soaks into the soil, where it is taken up by plants. What isn't used is drained into a collection tank below the biomes, where it is later purified through reverse osmosis. The primary source is through condensation of atmospheric water vapor through an atmospheric handler, water that evaporates from the ocean and is given off from respiratory processes from plant life, especially in the rainforest. In order to maintain carbon and oxygen levels, the rainforest and ocean biomes provided oxygen via photosynthesis. Carbon levels would be maintained both through natural respiration as well as through composting organic material when it became low. If necessary, a CO2 scrubber was included in the biosphere to maintain the proper levels. The biosphere maintains a cycle in which carbon and oxygen are constantly interchanged. Plant life in the form of algae and trees takes in carbon dioxide and sunlight in order to produce oxygen. Both plants and animals intake oxygen via respiration, releasing carbon dioxide. The algae provides oxygen for life inside the ocean biome. The ocean also diffuses some of the oxygen back into the atmosphere. CO2 is also diffused into the water, providing for algae's photosynthesis. The trees and other land-based plant life lock carbon in their mass through photosynthesis. This carbon can be stored for use as compost when carbon levels in the system lower. Animal waste can also be utilized as compost. This carbon-rich compost material is then ingested by bacteria within the soil, consuming oxygen and releasing the carbon dioxide back into the system. Provided that light levels are consistent, the oxygen-carbon levels remain stable in the airtight biosphere. In a similar fashion, the biosphere food supply would also be self-sufficient. In order to provide for future crop, non-hybridized plants were used. Waste from food preparation was fed to the livestock along with the high-nutrient azolla plants from the rice paddies. The domesticated pigs would offer fresh meat with generational cycles. The chickens would provide eggs and meat with their later generations. The goats served as a milk source. The only intended input from outside the closed system was light and heat. Sunlight, which was provided through the glass planes enclosing the biosphere, and heat, which was taken in by running water pipes underground to be warmed. One of the first problems that surfaced after the start of the experiment was a drop in oxygen levels. The level of carbon was high compared to the oxygen level. This made the scientists have to open up the lungs to the outside of the facility to bring in oxygen and later pump in oxygen. They suspect that the oxygen depletion was caused by high organic content. Calcium carbonate was also a problem because it was forming on artificial concrete rocks due to excess carbon dioxide. This is where a lack of solar radiation also became a concern. The enclosed structure blocked a lot of sunlight from reaching through the glass, which absorbed the UV radiation. There was not enough light passing through the glass ceiling, reducing photosynthesis processes, causing erratic oxygen levels. Another problem that surfaced was that some air was leaking. This really hindered some interpretations of a sealed environment. However, most scientists deem this technical problem inevitable. A huge problem faced by the Biosphere II team was the loss of food to diseases and pests. All chemicals were kept out of the biosphere, and because of this, there were no sprays to kill the pests. They had to find a way to do it naturally with biological practices, which, as it turns out, is not as successful. This led to them turning to their food sources, seeds, to use as foods, which made it more difficult to grow enough new food. There was barely enough food for the team themselves, so their animals, pigs and chickens, had to be eaten since they couldn't be fed. In the book, it was pointed out many times how much weight Dawn had lost, and this was why. Jane Pointier, who was part of the 8 who entered the biosphere in 1991, stated that they were always hungry, even after a meal. Another problem witnessed was the concept of natural selection. Some species survived better than others, and as we learned early in the book, when Dawn almost immediately encountered cockroaches, insects including ants, cockroaches, and katydids survived and reproduced most successfully. Even though these insects survived, others were not as lucky, such as insects who the team relied upon to pollinate the plants. The Smithsonian Institute performed an analytical report after the experiment took place, and it focused on many management problems such as the lack of a well-developed written scientific plan, an ad hoc mix of scientific initiatives of varying quality, over-concern with proprietary information, which has impeded the flow of scientific information interaction, and possible embellishments of data. These statements make many question the legitimacy of the experiment. Since science is the base of this experiment, there needs to be a specific way to implement and monitor it. Science is delicate and can easily be made ineffective. According to a study by UCSC, compatibility is one of the main concerns when considering life in space stations. An anthropologist from Anacapa Sciences expresses his concern in that you can tough it out in a tin can with 2 or 5 other people, but that ability to keep up at front eventually erodes over time. A member of the team, Jane Pointier, who was 29 when she entered the biosphere, made a statement saying that the crew split into 2 factions about 6 months into the mission, and from that point on, the 2 groups worked together but could not get along. Their differences curtailed creativity and caused communication problems. Before the halfway point of the experiment, the interpersonal difficulties set in and split the team. The sociological term used for these human behavior in an organization is coercive organization, which is an organization that is forced to create a strict environment of rules and regulations. The culture is one of strict obedience and order, and members are typically stripped of individuality and forced to conform. In the biosphere, the behavior had an effect on the participants similar to that of a prison. Even though the participants voluntarily joined the experiment, the coercive organization problem still had a negative effect. Sociological problems must be addressed since the biosphere was built for human survival in a catastrophic event. Losing creativity and communication due to the confinement and strict adherence to the rules would hinder production of basic human needs for survival and, in the worst case, cause violence and fear chaos. The science that was built around for the survival of the species would be useless unless the human population thrives. Although they weren't all that successful in configuring solid relationships between the crew members, they did attempt to prepare them for isolation. In an interview, Jane Pointier talked about how part of their training was being sent to isolated environments with a small group of people. For example, they were sent to the middle of the desert and to a ship in the middle of the ocean. She, along with many, believed that they were prepared to face the problems ahead of them. The Terranauts was about human interaction rather than focusing on the science and technological features of the enclosure. The novel is based on the narration and experiences of 3 people who are struggling personally with human emotions and egocentricity. It showed the effect of coercive organization from an inside view. In a real-world biosphere, the interaction would be more complicated. The population would be larger, and the basic human needs would not be met because of our human frailties. Closely monitored by mission control and the public, the fundamentals of coercive existence, nothing in, nothing out, was their mantra. The Terranauts were pushed to a breaking point, which the novel encapsulated.